All right, there we go. Okay, so just to kind of repeat everything for people who may have just joined. So we are from the Peer Advisors for Writing team, or PAW. And what we do at PAW is Min and Paul and I are also students, just like everyone else, but we've completed AC1, AC2, ART, a bunch of other writing courses. And so we are here to give you guys, other students, kind of just like senpai advice on writing, on the writing process, on all the things about writing that can be really challenging. And what we do is you can book a one-on-one session with any of us. We have 5 PAWs currently, and you can book a session with us, and you can bring your assignments. You can bring your AC1 papers, you can bring your AC2 papers, your ARLs, your theme charts, assignments for other classes, other major classes, you know, final papers, ARLs, citations, all of that. And we will help you out with it however we can. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to get started. What we were thinking of doing today is going over a few specific themes or a few specific kind of FAQs that we've had with PAW in terms of students who generally have a lot of similar issues in the writing process. But before that, I just want to get started straight away and ask, who has questions about writing? What does everyone find challenging? What do you think we can help you out with today? So feel free to turn your videos on, turn your cameras on, type in the chat, raise your hand, whatever works for everyone. Finding sources for my research paper. Do you have any advice? Ooh, good question. I've actually had a lot of students recently asking me this. So Anna wants to know how to find good sources for her research paper. Do you have any advice? Okay. Paul, Min, anyone wants to answer this? I can pull up a few resources from the PAW website as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say that my general advice is that you would start searching from something that's a little bit more general, and then once you have that, like, sort of the general ideas in mind, you would start digging deeper into the more specific arguments of your research paper. So I think that maybe you don't, at the very first stages, you don't really have to go into Google Scholar or anything, but just normal Google, just to have a general view of your arguments. And then once you start to know, like, visualize what those specific arguments are, you can go into Google Scholar or websites like that to sort of detail a little bit your searches so that the results that you want pop up.
Yeah. Let me just add on to that before I hand over to Paul. Then you kind of have to get into what is a good source, right? And a really good point here is that, you know, if everyone here has taken ART, yeah, similar thing. It takes time to find a good source, Stefan. Yeah, exactly. So a good source is, it generally refers to something that would pass the CRAAP test really well. And things that pass the CRAAP test are usually peer-reviewed journal articles, right? So like Min said, once you get past the initial stage of doing your preliminary research, then you want to move into sites that collect journal articles, collect academic journal articles. These are called databases. But even once you get into these databases, I'm sure an issue a lot of you have been having is that it becomes really hard to narrow down your search criteria. You're still getting a bunch of really weird results, and you don't know what is up with that. The simple response here is that your search criteria are probably too broad, in that there's a lot of people writing a lot of stuff every day on the same topics, but really, really small aspects of the same topics. So if you're going to put in on Google Scholar a search term, like search criteria like the effects of global warming, it's going to kind of be overwhelming because there's so much. There have been so many articles published every day about the smallest aspects of global warming that you're probably going to be like, well, there's nothing here for me. So one thing that I will put in the chat is a project that other pods have worked on, which is about narrowing down your search criteria. It's search tips for Google, and this should really help you. But yeah, a big piece of advice that I would give anyone, bless you, is narrow down your search criteria. Think about taking the terms that you are putting in and making them far more specific. Paul, anything you'd want to add to this?
Definitely, I wanted to mention that this narrowing down your topic is probably the best idea to find good sources on different databases. I also want to mention, probably someone don't know or doesn't sure how to find good databases at the first place. I'm pretty sure there is a good list on the POTI website, right, with a lot of access and passwords because of the online atmosphere now. So you can always check the library on POTI to find good databases besides the Google Scholar. But then, yes, specifying and identifying the specific keywords for your research, I think would be probably the best advice.
And one helpful tip for that is to try synonyms, right? Because using one word might not give you the results you want, but if you change that word to something else that is along the same lines, it the results might pop up. So yeah, it's sort of like finding your topic, to be honest. Once you would start from something really general and then you would start narrowing it down. So the same thing applies for your sources.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's a really good point. So what you can do is kind of apply the same thing that Min and I were talking about in our workshop on topic selection. You take your topic and then you narrow it down with a set of questions: who, what, where, when, and why. So if you're going to talk about the effects of global warming, on whom, right? And then you move on into the effects of global warming on sea turtles, where, in the Pacific Ocean, when, after the Paris Climate Change Agreement or something, anything like that, that will really help narrow it down. And then you're going to have a far more substantial search, like a far more substantial set of search criteria, which is the effects of global warming. And even global warming is still really broad. Do you mean carbon emissions? Do you mean the depletion of the ozone layer? And then you break that down on endangered species of sea animals in the Pacific Ocean. That is going to give you a lot more specific search criteria. And another way in which you can identify academic sources is, if you already have a few, you can look at what or who these sources have cited and then go off of there. You can look at the studies they draw from, you can look at the authors they are citing all the time, and then progress from there. So it doesn't always have to be things that you find firsthand. Okay, I hope that helped Stefan and Anna about finding academic sources. I will also put in the chat another project that we have about, it's a cheat sheet to do with the CRAAP test, so that when you find these sources, you can actually figure out, okay, are they actually good sources or not? Okay, so tips on avoiding passive sentences and the passive voice in writing. Okay, I'm going to jump right on this one because I remember reading about this. So basically, to everyone here, the passive voice is kind of when you're like, instead of Min gave me the laptop, the laptop was given to me by Min. And the passive voice it's not grammatically wrong. It's not, but it makes your sentences really, really confusing. Because you can see how it would be easier for me to say that Min gave me the laptop as opposed to the laptop was given to me by Min. you basically change the subject of the sentence. And a lot of lecturers say avoid the passive voice as much as you can, because it changes up, it makes your sentence really clunky. It makes it really hard to get around, especially when your sentence is long and then you start with the laptop and then something has to happen to the laptop, but that action comes much later. So a few ways to avoid the passive voice in writing are, you have to train yourself to see when you are writing in the passive voice and then stop and go be like, no, let's change that around. And one way you can identify that is through the use of the word by, okay? So whenever you see this was done by someone, or whenever you see by in the middle of a sentence that you've written, you probably know that this can be turned around. Okay, so keep an eye out for the word by. And what you can also keep in mind about the passive voice is that, and this is slightly more technical, but it basically involves any form of a to be verb, to do, to run, to jump, whatever. So that plus a past participle. Okay, so and that gives you the passive voice. The laptop was thrown, so that's to be, to me, by Min. So anytime you see a to be verb in the middle of your sentence followed by a past participle, that is the passive voice. Anytime you see by in the middle of a sentence, that is the passive voice, and you can definitely train yourself into avoiding it. I hope that helped. Does anyone, okay, Min, Paul?
I think Hayari pretty much covers our points. But yeah, like we always say, train yourself to familiarize with the process of writing things. So if you're a little bit uncomfortable with passive voices, train yourself to sort of sit back after writing and then read your paper from top to bottom and identify to see if you wrote any passive voice sentences. And we know that this process takes time, obviously, but you'll get better. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, as Hayati mentioned, like passive voice sentences can be really tricky, can be complex, make sentence less clear. So definitely try to practice more and avoid that, but also be very careful about making that passive sentences first person or third person, because in many essay types or many academic papers, it says specifically in the rubric, or it's mentioned by your lecturer or your professor, that please don't try to avoid first person or third person. So be careful with that. Be sure to check the rubric and advise with your professor first before changing passive voice into any of those forms.
Yeah. Yeah, on that note, Brian, I hope we were able to help you. If you have any follow-up questions, please go ahead. It's the confusing part of writing for everyone. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So does anyone have any other preliminary questions that they wanted to kind of get off before they started? Okay. And on that note, I have a problem of not being able to find a good supportive source for my idea. Because the paper I am doing is a case analysis, many things are based on, not on ready data information. It's an interpreter's problem. Anna, do you want to unmute yourself and kind of give us a little more context here? Because then maybe other people can also pick up from, everything that you've been facing. Anna?
Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Hello, pause. So to be exact, I'm doing a case analysis. And because this is a case analysis, it should be something that is original and based on kind of like personal observation. So I observed for quite a few things, but that is just kind of like based on personal experience. So I was trying to find kind of like supported information about it. But it turns out that there wasn't really many sources that talks about that issue that I'm realizing. So that is probably my case. So do you have any advice for that? Did I make it clear?
Yeah, I think you did, in that you have a case study and you're having issues finding specific sources for it, right? Outside of, personal opinion.
Kind of.
Okay. Paul, Min?
I would say that's a definitely very unique and specific case, and that's why we really do recommend putting as much effort when you actually choose your topic first. So it's not a problem in the later stages of your researches or writing, but it's totally okay that you decided to finalize your opinion on this case analysis. And in that case, I would probably recommend that if you cannot find any similar arguments or cases to what you are realizing now or writing about, I would think you could probably look at something else, maybe some general opinion, general ideas that you are writing in your maybe introduction or discussion, and try to find some supportive ideas to that particular thing. And your main arguments will be based on your opinion, because it is your case analysis. And that is why you are doing your own research here. So it definitely can be the case that there are no similarities in other famous or other researchers. So you can just try to find any additional information and put it not in the body, or just to put it somewhere else as like a more general information.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Paul summed it up really well, but something that I would say is, again, narrow down your search criteria always. And if you can't find sources on a topic, then you've got a very unique set of problems. Generally, it has to do with your search criteria and where you're looking. But if you really, really, really can't find sources, then you need to think about why, right? Is your topic, because people do research on every aspect of everything all the time. There's generally always work on a specific topic, no matter how specific. Okay. So maybe you need to take a step back and broaden what you're looking at. If you're doing a case study, if you're kind of interrogating a specific aspect of any topic, or of any country, or of any specific case or person or company or whatever, look at other things to do with that case that might not be directly related to your topic. And then from those sources, like I was saying earlier, look at things that are then more related to your topic. But start by doing a bit of general background information on your case itself, on your subject itself. Yeah, I hope that helped, Anna. But if you have any follow-up questions, if you're still confused, please go ahead. Min?
Yes.
Yep.
I also think, yeah, probably this is the best point to recommend our PAW sessions, because this is a very unique and specific topic and case. And so, Anna, if you still have some difficulties or misunderstandings here, I think it would be the best for you to just book a session with one of us, and we can look together in the specifics and try to help like even more there.
Yeah, because today we kind of want to take a more general approach, but if you book a PAW session, we can get right into your paper itself. Okay, so on that note, we're going to move into, okay, should we cite personal information about authors in CRAAP tests, such as their university names? Ooh, okay, Min, do you want to take this? I have the project on this somewhere.
Okay. Should we cite personal information about authors in CRAAP part? Okay. I think that if you can do that, that might be a useful way also to sort of judge the author of what you're um, writing about. But here I see that you're using the word cite personal information in the CRAAP test, right? So you said specifically the CRAAP test. So I think the CRAAP test is just for your own personal judgment before you use that source, right?
Oh no, but you have to like for the ARL, for the evaluation part.
For the evaluation part of the era. Well, then I think that using the name of the university that the authors uh is currently working at is one useful aspect for you to use, because what if the professor the person was working at some well-known university, right? And that really helps boost up the sort of credibility of the source that you're using.
Yeah.
But something really, really important to remember when you're identifying the qualifications of your writer, which is this first A in the CRAAP test, right? Authority. Do not take their bio off their website and paste it directly into your paper, because that's where a lot of students fall prey to plagiarism, right? The point of this is that you identify yourself that they're from this university, which is of good repute, of ill repute. And then you, and then you phrase it on your own terms. So it is definitely important to cite personal information such as their university names. Make sure you're not copying their bios and putting it there. That is a direct pathway to getting flagged for plagiarism, right? And it's something that's very easily avoidable by you just putting something in your own words. So just a very quick refresher for everyone. The CRAAP test, what we're going for here is the A for authority, which is the source of your information, and things that you should be looking at are who the author is, whether it's sponsored, what are the author's qualifications or credentials to write on this topic. Is there any contact information given, or is it kind of sus because you don't know, this could be a random person? Does the URL reveal anything about the source? So for example, if it's a .gov website, then it's government information, and you have to keep that in mind. If it's a .org, then it's free access. Anyone can open or publish on it, which makes it a bit dodgier. But a .edu might be a bit more credible. So, and we have a lot of resources like this on the PAW website, which one of us will put in the chat. So it's all these projects that PAWs who have worked with students and seen, where students get confused have made. So paraphrasing, transitional words, APA citations especially, which are a big source of concern, and we're going to get into at some point. But yeah, that is in response to the question about personal information. Paul, anything to add on that?
Not really. I think you really did a great job covering that question. So Nodira, we hope that it helped you, and I think we can just move on to another question.
Yeah, so someone has commented that it's easier to find data from news media than from academic sources. Yes, possibly, but then you have to keep the CRAAP test in mind. Keep in mind, the fact that it's easier to publish on news media sites than on peer-reviewed websites, peer-reviewed journals. So a peer-reviewed journal is basically, I write a paper and I think it's okay, and I send it into a journal, and then it gets sent to experts in my field. So Paul and Min review it really, really closely. They make a bunch of corrections. They're like, hey, this sucks and this sucks and this is good. And then they send it back to me. And then I edit it, or they reject it entirely. And so peer-reviewed articles are supposed to be really credible because they undergo kind of this rigorous process of correction and recorrection and careful checking. So that's why that's supposed to be more credible than your average news site. And that might also be why it's easier to find things on news sites than it is, with news media. Ooh, and our next question is, can we take a source which may be kind of biased, but serves my purpose? Interesting question. Okay. All right. Okay, Paul, do you want to get on this?
I would say bias is definitely a really big and important topic in the academic writing, and I think most of the professors and we always recommend students not to take too much or look too much at the biased sources, because even if you do a CRAAP test, bias is one of the points of that CRAAP test, and its credibility, right? So if it has like a little bit of biasness there, I think it should be okay if you, for example, take only one of these sources, or not take too much information on too many sites from that particular author. But in general, I think we would always recommend everyone to try to stand far from biasness from yourself and from other sources and researches.
Yeah. And to kind of add on to that, I'm not too sure what you would mean in that a biased article would be serving your purposes. Or maybe you were trying to identify, there are a bunch of sources that can be biased. In that case, you're good if you're identifying the bias in your sources, right? If you are going to personally identify that this is biased and use it anyway, that might be a bit of a questionable decision without actually putting in your paper that, hey, I'm using this article. It is quite biased, but it serves my purposes for these reasons. If you're identifying it in that manner, then you might be okay, right? But if you're not going to, then it weakens kind of the strength of your argument. Because if someone fact checks you, or if someone looks up your citation and it's like, well, this is a biased article, it's going to severely weaken the strength of your argument, right? So I would say if you are going to use a source with the acknowledgement that it is biased, then you can do that. That works out. Min, anything to add?
I think it's a really tempting thing to do when you want to have as much support for your arguments as possible. And I think the same thing applies for using a piece of information to your advantage. So, for example, you see a research paper, right? And the paper actually has a completely opposite standpoint from what you're arguing. But then there's just one little piece of information within that paper sort of supports your argument, and you choose to use that information without taking into account the whole point of the research paper was against your argument. That's a bit of bias also towards the way that you write your paper. And I think it's tempting because we all know that it's going to support your paper, but it's just not a really objective way of writing an academic paper.
Yeah. I hope that helped, Tanmay. If you have any other questions, please go ahead. I haven't seen this question in so long. I haven't been to a PAW advising session before. Why would you need to prepare before a PAW session? Okay. I love it when students ask me this. It makes me so happy that they're prepared. But basically, you don't need a lot to come to PAW. Just make your booking. And it would help if you had your specific questions in mind, because sessions are either 20 minutes or 40 minutes. And so we don't have the time to sit and go through every aspect of your paper, right? That would just take a really long time. And PAW is more about answering your questions than getting someone to closely proofread or ghostwrite your paper. And so if you could come up with specific things you would like us to look at, or specific topics, like, hey, I have questions about APA, I have questions about my organization, I don't know what an in-text citation is. If you could come up with some really specific questions, that would be helpful. And also, you know, this is a more of a personal thing, but please show up on time, because there are other students who are also waiting. And if you take up a time slot, then, you know, they can't do it. But no, Min and Paul?
Yeah, I would say definitely some assignments can be pretty long, and you might have a lot of issues or questions regarding that. So I would say try to plan beforehand and prioritize some of the issues that are most important for you to discuss first, and then we would pretty much utilize our time together to the maximum and try to cover up everything. Because of course we can try and take a look at your whole assignment and your whole paper, but as Hayati mentioned, the time is really limited there. So if you have a specific plan and priorities there, so it will be easier for both of us.
I would say, like what Hayati said, we cannot cover everything from top to bottom. Even if you tell us to look at, for example, the grammar mistakes from the beginning until the end, we would still recommend you to pick a specific paragraph or section that you find that is the most troubling. And then from that example, we can sort of draw out some common mistakes of your paper so that you can work on your own later on. So given that we only have 20 to 40 minutes, that's not a lot of time for us to sort of go through a really long research paper. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that's it. But aside from, you know, figuring out what you'd like to ask us, that's pretty much it. Just show up and, you know, it's really chilled out. We'll have conversations and we'll take care of the rest. Okay. How to recognize bias in an article. Ooh, okay. So firstly, if you run an article through the CRAAP test, and if it doesn't hold up, it is probably biased, right? But then that gets us into the question of, what do you mean biased? Like, what do you really mean? Like, everyone has an opinion on something. But the issue with bias is that it affects the objectivity of your research, right? So I can think the room is 30 degrees. No, I can think the room is really hot, and Paul can think it's really cold. And those are both our opinions, right? But then objectively, we can say that the room is 30 degrees. You can't change the objective fact, but people can have different opinions about it. But the fact that I'm from a tropical country means that that is going to affect how I see the cold or the heat. Okay, so that is my bias. That is a personal prejudice that I have that affects the objectivity of my judgment. It affects how detached I am or attached I am to an issue, how likely I am to report it like it really is. Okay, and you can be biased unknowingly. You can be biased with a specific agenda. So if I'm getting sponsored by the NRA, the National Rifle Association in America, I'm probably going to be like, hey, guns are great. Everyone should have a gun, right? But, and that's my bias, right? So like that, you can be biased in a number of different ways. Okay, you can be biased in terms of being really, really, really emotional about an issue. And then you can tell kind of which side I'm leaning towards in terms of support or lack of support for something. So if you're reading a source and you're like, well, this is really only showing me one side of an issue, that's a sign of bias. Another sign of bias would be actually anything to do with a logical fallacy is actually a sign of bias. And a site that I really like to use and give students is yourlogicalfallacyis.com. And it shows you all the different logical fallacies. Appeal to emotion, where you put in a really emotional argument to manipulate how your reader will feel. All of these are signs of bias. If you want to look for an article that is free of bias, you want to look for something that will provide both sides of the issue, that will recognize both arguments, that does not utilize personal opinion. All of those are ways to identify and avoid bias. Min, Paul?
Definitely, bias is not an easy thing to identify, and you definitely cannot see the bias of the paper from just the first look of it. You need to analyze the whole article and see through everything. And sometimes even if the paper is heavily, let's say, one-sided, let's say it's like an argumentative essay, right? And you have your own stance, and you have like facts that support your ideas, but you use only them and you don't acknowledge the other sides or other opinions anywhere. That could be also considered as bias, because even if even in the structure of an argumentative essay, there is a refutation paragraph where you stand the kind of most popular opinions of the other side. And if you acknowledge any of the most popular ideas or sides anywhere in your introduction, conclusion, or discussion, or anywhere, it can save like the whole paper from being very biased or like heavily one-sided.
Min, anything to add on the topic of identifying bias? Yeah.
And I think really ART helps you a lot with this, to be honest. After the course, I think that you will be able to sort of identify which source is biased and which is maybe a little bit less biased and which is not. And one thing that I usually focus on is really be mindful of statistics, to be honest, because statistics can be misleading, right? And you really need to see if they're really accurate, and it's really up to your own judgment, but really be mindful of statistics. Yeah.
Yeah. If you go through the logical fallacies page, I think that'll be really helpful because it identifies a lot of ways in which something can be biased. The misuse of statistics, the misuse of emotional arguments, the way that your argument itself might be constructed in a biased way. So you use what we call the straw man argument, which is you make your own argument and then you knock it down and you're like, hey, my argument is great. Look at this thing I just refuted that I made up myself. So there's a lot of ways you can do this. And yeah, hopefully this will help you identify bias in other articles. It'll also really help if you can then apply this to your own writing. So a lot of students write about issues that they feel really passionately about, which is great. And, strongly advise that. But at the same time, if you feel really passionately about something, it's really hard for you to see when you are biased. Right. And hopefully when you start getting used to evaluating sources for bias, you'll get better at evaluating your own sources, your own writing for bias. But yeah, I really hope that helped, Henry. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
The next one is, for example, what if I found a really interesting piece of information on my source and I want to put the information into my essay? Will paraphrasing with citation will be good enough to avoid plagiarism? I would say it's the best way. We always recommend students to use paraphrasing with the citation of the author's name and the date and the year, and it's actually really beneficial for you, to be honest, because once you paraphrase and you actually know how to paraphrase, um, and it goes for, if the paraphrasing goes well, it will actually help you avoid plagiarism and makes what you're citing fits with the voice of your paper. And that's a really important thing, right? And that's why we always recommend using paraphrasing or summary over direct quotations. Hayari, Paul?
Um, I would say, I think you've pretty much got it. I mean, mind you, there's different ways to get into citation. You can use a direct quotation, and if that gets flagged as plagiarism, as long as you've cited it correctly, you're okay. Will paraphrasing with citation be good enough? Like Min said, probably, but make sure you're paraphrasing it closely enough. Changing a couple words here and there, but still keeping the original sentence will still probably get you pulled up by Turnitin. Okay, so properly rephrase it would be my advice. Make sure it's definitely in your own words. So if you come to Paul, what we're probably going to tell you is, okay, you have this sentence and you've changed a couple of words. What does it mean? Just tell me in one sentence that, what you think it means. And then we will write that down and give it back to you. And there is your paraphrase, right? And that's kind of the easiest way to do it. Paul, anything to add?
Yes, I definitely want to add that be sure to always try to keep a good balance between paraphrases and citations, because sometimes direct quotations can be more convincing, let's say, and more argumentative, more supportive towards your topic. And if you do put a lot of only one of these types, only a lot of paraphrases, but no direct quotations, or a lot of direct quotation, but no paraphrases, the balance can be not good in your paper, and it might be not the best work. So it always depends on the length of the assignment as well, but I do recommend to try to keep that balance between paraphrases and citations.
Yeah. Okay, on that note, does anyone have any other questions? Because how to read faster, otherwise it takes so much time, and as I have deadlines, I start panicking. This is an interesting question, and trust me, as senior students, we all have this problem. Okay. How do you read faster? This is an interesting question again. Yeah, Min?
How to read faster? That I would say that train yourself to read faster. I mean, you can start by giving yourself goals. For example, normally you would start at 30 pages per 1 hour and a half, right? You would start, for example, 2 hours. Then you would start narrowing that goal down a little bit. You force yourself to finish within that goal. For example, you start at 2 hours, then you can reduce the time a little bit to 1 hour and a half. And then I would say that you would see that over time you would see the improvement, but it's a process that you need to be persistent, and also realize that it takes time to be able to read faster, because I know that everyone absorbs the information in a different way, right? Maybe it takes a little bit more time for you to absorb the same amount of information than others, and that's totally okay, right?
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah, just make sure in your in your training yourself to read fast that you're not missing out on meaning. Especially, it's okay to read something a couple more times than usual, just to make sure you're getting the meaning out of it, in which case maybe what you're looking for is skimming, right? not really reading everything really, really closely, but making sure you're getting the gist of it, making sure you're getting the most meaning out of it. That can be something that will help you when you have a lot to read and you want to get the general idea. But at the same time, you've got the same problem in that make sure you're not missing out on really important information while you're skimming sources. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely a lot of techniques to fast reading, as Hayati mentioned. Skimming or scanning through the text can be a good option because you can just try to look for specific keywords maybe you have identified before, but I would also recommend that as only a, let's say, preliminary thing to do before you actually, when you, for example, try to choose to see if this specific source is good for you or not, but when you are actually trying to read through it as you want to take as much from it as you can in terms of meaning. So sometimes it is easier for a lot of people to read aloud. In that way, they can actually identify everything more clearly, let's say. And in that case, it might be a very personal thing. So just try to see some of the different techniques, try to read aloud or anything else and see what's better for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of like when you find reading time consuming and when you start to have deadlines, you start panicking. That's where I think your organization really comes in handy. I
Mm.
would I would normally start reading something like a week before the actual reading date, and then I because I know that I have a week, I have time to read that. And once I finish that, for example, the reading is for a Monday class. On Sunday, I would just review the reading because I already have the information in mind, right? That actually speeds up your reading process in the later stages. Once you have the information in mind, you would read through the document a lot faster and will definitely help you remember the information longer.
Yeah, pretty much. Um, I know there's a definite science and art to speed reading. I know nothing about it. But that's also an option. I have an exam this Friday, and there'll be 2 questions that students have to answer in an hour and a half, but I'm not very confident about writing in such a short period of time. Advice about time management or aspects on which to concentrate in such a situation. Is this an in-person? Are you writing by hand or is this online? Because yeah, it would be slightly different depending. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and talk or type in the chat. Yeah.
So we have to type, and I'm not actually very confident with typing too.
Okay.
Okay. So, well, yeah, no, people type at different speeds, which is completely understandable. You're not comfortable about writing such period of time. Okay, so time management and what to concentrate on. This is slightly moving out of our area of academic writing, but just in terms of general advice, I would say start with breaking down the question, identify what the question requires you to write, then make a plan, divide it among your hour and a half, and try and stick to it as far as you can. And leave yourself some time, for additional checking or whatever. Paul, Min?
I would say, sorry, Min.
No, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think if it is an exam questions, I don't think it require any APA or formatting additionally for you to do. So it should be a easier task. But then I would also suggest that you might start with typing or writing down your initial thoughts, initial ideas to those questions first, and then you'll have just a lot to think or read through you already written, and then you can just maybe delete some of the unnecessary things, and then you will have a pretty decent amount of text there, so you can just choose whatever parts you want to leave there or which other parts you don't want to leave there. So I would say just start typing, and that's probably the best advice there.
Yeah. Min?
My advice is a little bit kind of opposite to what Paul just gave you, but I think that works as well what Paul just said. But I think one way for you to control your time, and you might think this might be to your disadvantage, but I think it's not, is to spend 5 minutes um of your exam time just to give yourself um a, a time slot to really understand the questions and have like a brief outline of what you're going to write. Because once you start to write, and for example, if you're from an IR major, you start to write a lot, then your information is gonna be a little bit disorganized, unorganized. Then I think it's better for you to have 5 minutes at the beginning just to have a brief outline of what you're going to write. And I think it really helps further down when you're writing the two answers. And yeah, like Hayari said, leave some time for you to read what you wrote again, maybe 5-10 minutes at the end. And yeah, divide your time wisely between the two. For example, if you're comfortable with one question, you might want to allocate a little bit less time for that question. And maybe the other question you're not really comfortable, you can spend a little bit more time on it.
Yeah. Okay, we have a bit of time left. I hope we could help you with your exam writing related questions, but any other questions on academic writing? And so we're kind of getting into the semester now, so where you guys are probably looking at first drafts of your first essays or finding sources for your ARLs, or especially, and with your first essay comes the fact that you need to check it out really carefully for citations, especially what are citations? Why am I not doing them right? So any questions on that are definitely welcome. Anything to do with organization, anything to do with, I see that finding academic sources or credible sources is kind of a common issue for everyone. So if anyone wants to ask us anything to do with that, please unmute yourself, type in the chat, go nuts.
Oh yeah, just a quick announcement. Well, if you have any questions, you can definitely ask us. But quick announcement, I think on the 27th of this month, which is 2 weeks from now, we will have another workshop that is about thesis statements and language for different rhetorical strategies. And I think it will be really helpful for you to form your thesis statements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stay tuned, because we have a lot of workshops planned from PAW about more. And so these Q&A sessions are more general. You can ask us anything. But what we also plan on doing is having workshops to address more specific issues, impactful writing, thesis statements. And if you even have anything that you'd like us to focus on more specifically, feel free. But, these are also things that you can work out in a PAW session. So I'm going to put the link in which you can book a PAW session in the chat. So you can feel free to go ahead and get like a one-on-one consultation with us. But yeah, outside of that, we're definitely still open for any questions you guys have to do with writing. What have you found challenging about AC1 or AC2 especially, which, might be problematic in that you have to spend your whole semester writing one paper, or ART? We're open to questions.
I think we can also mention here that maybe there are some students here that are interested in working as a PAW in the future.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be having a job fair next week, next Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, next Wednesday.
So yes, if anyone is interested in working as a PAW or just wants to know how the process is, you can meet us next Wednesday on a PAW job fair and ask any specific questions about that.
Yeah, working as PAW is fun.
Oh, and I will send in the link for today's participation
Yes.
attendance sheet.
Attendance.
Yeah.
So if you
Right.
had to fill out a form to prove you were here, the link is in the chat. Okay. We're still
Yeah.
open for questions if
Yeah.
anybody
Yeah.
has any,
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah. but please feel free.
Writing a good introduction.
Ooh,
Oh, I think, do we have a project for that?
do we
I
have a
think
project for
Phoebe-
this? I feel like we should.
Phoebe is doing a
should.
project for that. No,
Right.
Phoebe is doing a project for that.
Right.
I
So
think
give
it's
give
about
us
to be
till the end of the
published.
semester. Yeah.
Yeah.
But until then, a few things that I think we can tell you is that there are some stock components of a good introduction. You need a good hook. Yep. And a good hook is something that will really grab your reader's attention. So it's a statistic, a shocking statement, a funny statement, maybe not a funny statement, but more a statement of, more question that will invite thought, but anything that will attract your reader's attention straight away. So you need your hook. Then your introduction needs to go into the general background surrounding your topic. And then it needs to move kind of like an hourglass into the more specifics of your topic, into the more specific aspects of your topic, rather. What you are going to be talking about. So, you start talking about global warming in general, then you start talking about your specific aspect of global warming that you're going to be covering. And then you move into your thesis statement. And I'm sure Min can tell you all about what comprises a good thesis statement. But Paul, anything else you would add to the ideal introduction?
Yeah, I would say that's just an ideal structure of the introduction. If you follow all the steps and include everything there, all of those aspects, it would be a really good introduction. I would say a lot of students are struggling with hooks because sometimes they're not sure how to do them efficiently. So sometimes it's better to use rhetorical questions, maybe some other techniques there. But as long as you include all of those aspects, your introduction should be good.
Yeah. But yeah, Min, anything to add on the very brief topic of a thesis statement, which is core to an introduction?
Yeah, thesis statement, I think you should really, it depends on your type of paper, but you should really focus on the relationships between the variables, the relationships between the things that you are going to discuss. And most of the time, I think your professors would want you to be a little bit more specific with what you are going to discuss. So with what you're going to discuss in the body paragraph. And I think that should be reflected in your thesis statement also.
Yeah. Julian, I hope that helped. If you have any specific questions about the introduction, feel free to follow up. But aside from that, it looks like we're out of time for today. Thank you guys so much for coming. But we'll hang around for a couple of minutes just in case anyone has any final questions. But no, if you would like us to look at your assignments specifically, please, like Paul was saying, feel free to book an appointment and come to any of us at any time. We're really, really glad we can help you. But aside from that, if you don't have any other questions, you're free to go. All right. Thank you, guys. And hopefully we'll see you soon at PAW.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
very
guys.
much for coming.
Yeah. If you have any questions, we'll be here. No problem. No worries.
Please come to PAW. Okay, I guess we can close the session now.
Oh,
Wait.
we're
Okay,
good.
look at
Well,
let's stop recording. Can you hit stop recording again?